Lily Harris was a 12-year-old girl who once found joy in the simplest things, drawing, reading, and dreaming of a brighter future. But by the end of her 6th grade year, those dreams were shattered by relentless bullying. Sara and Hannah, two of her classmates, saw her as an easy target, and soon Lily was drowning in a sea of whispers, taunts, and isolation. It seemed like no one was listening, until one unexpected message from an old friend, Emily, reminded her that sometimes even the smallest flicker of kindness can be enough to change everything. But would it be enough to save her before it was too late? Lily Harris was just a typical 12-year-old girl when she entered the 6th grade at Oakwood Middle School. She was excited about the new year, eager to make new friends and explore her interests. Her parents often described her as a kind, thoughtful child, someone who could light up a room with her laughter and smile. She loved drawing, often spending hours sketching scenes from her favorite books, and she had an infectious enthusiasm for learning. But all of that would change by the end of the semester. At first, the bullying was subtle, easy to overlook. A whisper here, a snicker there, a comment about her clothes, the way she wore her hair, or the fact that she didn't seem to fit into the group of cool kids. Lily didn't think much of it at first. She told herself that it was just the typical teasing that everyone went through at some point. She convinced herself that it would pass, that people would move on to someone else. But the teasing didn't stop. It grew worse as the weeks passed. It was no longer just whispers. It became louder and more direct. Some of her classmates would call her names when the teachers weren't looking, pointing at her from across the room, laughing as they made cruel remarks about how she dressed or how she seemed to always have her nose buried in a book. Some days, she would walk through the hallway only to hear people muttering under their breath, "Weirdo," or "loser." At recess, when she used to eagerly join her friends on the playground, she now found herself sitting alone on the swings, watching other kids play in tight-knit groups. Lily didn't know who to turn to. She tried to reach out to her teachers, but each time they seemed too busy or dismissive, chalking it up to typical middle school drama. Her friends, the ones she thought would stand by her, began to distance themselves. Some of them even started laughing along with the others, their eyes shifting away when Lily tried to talk to them. It felt like everyone was turning against her, like she had somehow become invisible. At first, Lily tried to brush it off. She told herself that the words didn't matter, that she was strong enough to ignore the whispers and laughter. But with each passing day, it became harder to pretend. Her grades began to slip because she could no longer concentrate in class, her mind constantly distracted by the hurtful things people were saying. Her once enthusiastic spirit started to fade, and she found herself avoiding social interactions altogether. She stopped attending school events she had once enjoyed, such as dances or science fairs, and opted to stay home instead. The loneliness was unbearable. Each morning, as Lily prepared for school, a feeling of dread would settle over her chest. Her stomach twisted into knots as she imagined facing the same cruel remarks and stares. When she got on the school bus, she would try to find a seat away from others, hoping to avoid any more teasing. But it didn't work. There were always eyes watching, always words being said behind her back, and when she arrived at school, it felt like she was stepping into a battleground. There were moments when Lily thought about speaking up, about telling her parents how much it hurt, but she was afraid that they wouldn't understand, or worse, that they would make things worse. She didn't want to worry them, and she didn't want to make a scene. So she kept it all inside, silently suffering through each day, pretending that everything was fine. She kept her head down, hoping that if she stayed quiet enough, if she disappeared into the background, the bullying might stop. But with every passing day it only got worse, and Lily began to question if there was any way out. As the weeks passed, Lily's internal world began to crumble. At home, where she once found comfort in her family, she became more distant, hiding behind a mask of normalcy. Her parents, loving and well-meaning, could see something had changed. Her father would often ask, "How was school today, sweetie?" And Lily would smile and nod, but it was the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She had perfected the art of pretending everything was fine, and it had become easier to lie to them than to face the truth. Her mother, who usually spent time with Lily in the evenings, noticed her daughter's growing silence. She was no longer eagerly chatting about her day or sharing her latest art projects. Instead, Lily would retreat to her room, spending hours sketching aimlessly or staring at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts. She had stopped talking about her friends, stopped talking about anything at all. It was as though she was retreating into a shell, a place where no one could hurt her anymore. When Lily's parents asked her about school, she gave the same response. "It's fine, Mom. I'm just tired." But deep down, she was far from fine. She could feel the sadness creeping into every corner of her life. Even at home, she couldn't escape the loneliness that had wrapped itself around her heart like a vice. The bullying didn't stop once. She left school. It followed her, lingering like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. At night, Lily would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind would replay the cruel things that had been said to her throughout the day. "You're not like everyone else. You'll never fit in." The words would echo in her head, each one sharper than the last. And as the nights grew longer, the thoughts grew darker. She began to wonder if it would be better to just disappear. What if she wasn't there? What if the bullying stopped when there was no one left to target? Her journal, once a place of creativity and dreams, became a place of raw emotion, a place where she could pour out her sadness, her confusion, her anger. She scribbled down her thoughts furiously, as if writing could somehow release the pain. But the more she wrote, the heavier her heart became. There were moments when she found herself staring at the words she had written, wondering if anyone could possibly understand. And even if they did, would it matter? One evening her father noticed something strange. As he passed by Lily's room, he saw her sitting at her desk, a notebook open in front of her, her face pale and tired. He knocked gently on her door, but she didn't respond. When he stepped inside, he found her sitting motionless, her pencil in hand, but her gaze fixed on the wall. It was as if she was somewhere far away, lost in her thoughts. For a brief moment, he thought he might have glimpsed something that terrified him, something deep within Lily that he didn't understand. "Lily," he said softly, "what's going on? You can tell me if something's bothering you." She turned to him with a faint smile, but it was hollow. "I'm just tired, Dad. I'll be fine." He left her room that evening, feeling unsettled, unsure of how to reach her. He had no idea that his daughter was sinking deeper into a pit of despair, a pit she didn't know how to climb out of. Lily began to withdraw even further, burying herself in the silence. It was easier than facing the truth. It was easier than confronting the cruel reality that the people who were supposed to protect her, the friends, the teachers, even her parents, didn't fully understand what she was going through. She felt as if the walls around her were closing, suffocating her in a world where no one seemed to care. But even in the darkest moments, a small part of her still clung to hope. She still dreamed of a day when the bullying would stop, when she wouldn't have to hide anymore. But that hope was quickly fading. Every day felt like an endless loop, and each day that passed, Lily's hope grew dimmer. One cold, grey morning, Lily walked into school, dreading the day ahead. It had become a routine. Wake up, drag herself out of bed, try to put on a brave face for her parents, and then go to school, where the cruel whispers and mocking stares awaited her. She wished she could stay home, but there was no way to explain it without worrying her parents further. So, she pushed through, her mind swirling with exhaustion and dread as she made her way to her locker. That morning, the bullying reached a new level. It wasn't just the usual name-calling or teasing about her clothes. It was something darker, more deliberate. In the hallway, she overheard two girls, Sara and Hannah, talking loudly enough for her to hear as she passed. "I wonder what it would be like if Lily just wasn't here anymore. Like, if she just disappeared," one of them said, her voice filled with a kind of casual cruelty that sent a chill down Lily's spine. Lily froze in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were so simple, so matter-of-fact, but they felt like a stab to the heart. She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to turn around and confront them, to shout at them that what they were saying was wrong. But another part of her, the part that had been quietly suffocating for weeks, told her that it didn't matter. It wouldn't change anything. The cruelty was so ingrained in the school's atmosphere now that it felt like she was just another invisible target, one that could be easily discarded. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. In class, she could feel the weight of their words on her shoulders, pushing her deeper into the abyss. She sat at her desk, trying to focus, but all she could hear was the echo of the phrase, "If she just disappeared." It followed her into every corner of the classroom, into every whisper in the hallway, into every corner of her mind. She couldn't escape it. By lunch, she was already retreating to the girls' bathroom, where she could be alone. There was a part of her that still wished things could be different, that maybe if she waited long enough someone would notice. But as she stared at her reflection in the mirror, the face looking back at her felt like a stranger's. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, her skin pale, her cheeks hollow from the exhaustion that had settled in her bones. She barely recognized herself anymore. As she sat alone in the bathroom stall, trying to shut out the world, she heard the sound of footsteps outside. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she held her breath. It was the same feeling she had every time she was alone. The fear that someone would find her, corner her, and make her feel even smaller than she already did. But the footsteps passed by without stopping, and the silence returned. It was a silence that was suffocating, one that seemed to swallow everything around her. In the following days, Lily became more withdrawn. She had begun to dread school more than she ever thought possible, each day blending into the next, each moment a painful reminder of her isolation. Her once vibrant spirit was fading, and she couldn't shake the constant feeling that something was terribly wrong. She stopped participating in class discussions, stopped even attempting to make eye contact with her classmates. The thoughts in her head grew darker too. She began to wonder if it was even worth trying anymore. Every night, as she lay in bed, she would replay the events of the day, the taunts and jeers that seemed to haunt her. What if the bullying would never stop? What if it just got worse? The idea of running away, of disappearing completely, started to seem less like an impossible dream and more like an escape, a way out of the pain. But there was a part of her that still didn't want to give in to those thoughts. She didn't want to believe that this was all there was to her story. She still held on to a fragile thread of hope that things might change, that someone might step in and make it stop. She wasn't sure who that someone would be, but she clung to the possibility that, somewhere out there was a way out of the darkness that had enveloped her. It wasn't until one afternoon, as she walked home from school, that she reached her breaking point. The words that had been echoing in her mind for days became too much to bear. What if I just disappeared? The thought, once fleeting, took hold with frightening clarity. She wondered if the world would even notice, if anyone would care. The idea gnawed at her, growing stronger and more persistent. It was then that Lily realized she was on the edge, standing at a precipice she wasn't sure she could pull herself back from. The days after the dark thought first crept into Lily's mind were the hardest she had ever faced. Every morning felt like a struggle to wake up, to pull herself out of bed and face the world she no longer recognized. The pain of her loneliness gnawed at her relentlessly, but somehow she made herself go to school. She kept her head down, moved quietly through the hallways and tried to disappear into the background. It felt like the safest place to be. The weight of the whispers and stares still followed her, but she learned to live with them, or at least she tried to. One evening, as Lily sat at her desk, the silence in her room felt more oppressive than ever. She had taken to writing in her journal more frequently now, as if spilling her thoughts onto paper could somehow lighten the burden she carried. She had filled pages with tangled thoughts, with dark reflections on her life, on her worth. Her journal had once been a place for dreams, sketches, and stories, but now it was where she poured out her grief and confusion. It was in these private moments that Lily could no longer hide from the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling apart. She thought about what she had overheard the other day, the words that had cut deeper than anything else. What if she just disappeared? The idea of being gone, really gone, began to grow inside her. It seemed like it would bring an end to the endless torment. No more being the target, no more being ignored. It would all just stop. She imagined what it would be like to slip away quietly, to not have to face the world that had become so harsh. The thought was dark, yes, but in some twisted way, it was also a kind of relief. As the night stretched on, Lily sat in her room, staring blankly at the walls, her thoughts spiraling. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the journal, and for a brief moment she thought of writing one final entry. But what would she say? What words could ever capture the sadness and confusion that had taken root in her heart? What could she say to explain the endless ache, the loneliness that seemed to stretch out forever? But before she could write another word, something interrupted the heavy silence. A buzz. The sound of her phone vibrating on the desk broke through the dark cloud in her mind. It was a message, one from her best friend, Emily, who had moved away to another state last year. Emily had always been there for Lily, and even though they were no longer in the same school, they kept in touch. Lily hadn't expected anything, but something about the timing of this message made her pause. She opened it without thinking, her hands trembling slightly. The message was simple, but it hit her like a bolt of lightning. "I miss you, Lily. I hope you're okay. I'm always here for you." For a moment, everything in the world seemed to stand still. Lily stared at the words, the simple kindness of them washing over her. She could almost hear Emily's voice in her mind, as clear as if she were standing right next to her. Emily had always known how to make Lily feel better, how to make her feel seen and valued even when it seemed like the world was turning its back on her. But that wasn't what struck Lily the hardest. It was the realization that someone, somewhere, cared about her. Even after everything, even though they were miles apart, Emily still remembered her. Lily's chest tightened as her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until they arrived. Emily's message was like a lifeline thrown into the stormy sea of her thoughts. For the first time in weeks, Lily felt something stir inside her, a tiny spark of hope, so faint it almost seemed like a memory. But it was there. She wasn't alone. The tears that had been building for days now came freely, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. In that moment, Lily realized something important. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. There were people who cared. Emily had reminded her of that, and for the first time in ages, Lily felt the crushing pressure of her loneliness ease just a little. Still, she was torn. Her mind felt like it was a battleground. The dark thoughts that had taken root in her heart didn't disappear just because of a text message. But something had shifted. It was as if Emily had handed her a key to something she thought was locked away forever. The possibility that things could get better, that there could be a way out of the pain. As Lily sat in her room, her phone still in her hands, she felt a small but steady resolve begin to form. Maybe the pain wouldn't vanish overnight. Maybe the bullying wouldn't stop immediately. But Emily's message reminded her that there were people out there who loved her, and that love could be the first step toward healing. Maybe it wasn't the end of her story after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. The next morning, Lily woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't the usual weight of dread that had been pressing on her for months, but something lighter, almost like the tiniest flicker of hope. The message from Emily still lingered in her mind, its simple words echoing softly in her thoughts. "I'm always here for you." It wasn't a magic fix, but it was enough to make her feel less invisible, less alone. For the first time in a long while, Lily thought maybe, just maybe, things could change. She got dressed and headed to school, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. The thought of facing her classmates, the same ones who had tormented her for months, still made her stomach twist in knots. But today it felt different. She was no longer walking into the school alone. Emily's words had given her a sense of connection, a reminder that someone out there cared enough to reach out. It was small, but it was a start. When Lily walked into the school hallway, she kept her head held high, though she was still nervous. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to walk without fear, without the weight of the world bearing down on her. The whispers and stares were still there, of course. They always had been. But this time, instead of shrinking into herself, Lily made a conscious decision to hold her ground. She didn't let their cruel remarks hit as hard as they had before. She walked past them with her chin up, not allowing their words to have the same power over her. Throughout the day, something unexpected began to happen. As the hours passed, Lily's anxiety started to fade just a little. She was still haunted by the bullying, still haunted by the loneliness. but now there was a quiet sense of strength inside her that hadn't been there before. The more she focused on the support she had, like Emily's message, the less she felt like the world was closing in on her. Her chest wasn't as tight, and for the first time in months she actually believed she could make it through the day. That afternoon, as Lily sat alone at lunch, she was surprised by a tap on her shoulder. She looked up to find Mia, one of the quieter girls in her class, standing there. Mia was someone Lily had always liked, but she never imagined she would step forward. Mia had always been a bit of an outsider herself, someone who seemed to float on the edges of the popular group. But today, she smiled at Lily. "Hey," Mia said softly. "I was wondering if you wanted to join me and a couple of other people for lunch tomorrow. We're not doing anything special, just hanging out." Lily blinked, taken aback. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in spending time with her that she almost didn't know how to respond. Her mind flashed with all the doubts she'd built up over the years. Would they make fun of her? Would it be another trap? But there was something in Mia's eyes that told her this was different. For the first time in a long while, Lily allowed herself to believe that things might be changing. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Lily couldn't stop thinking about Mia's invitation. It wasn't just the idea of eating lunch with someone, but the fact that someone saw her. For the first time in ages, someone had reached out and offered her a chance to belong again. When she got home, Lily felt a quiet sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't the end of her struggles, but it was a new beginning, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always the possibility of light. She went to her room and picked up her journal, her mind racing with all the new thoughts and emotions swirling inside her. Instead of writing about pain and sorrow, she began writing about hope, about change, about how it felt to finally be seen again. As the weeks went by, things began to slowly improve for Lily. The bullying didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments when the old cruelty resurfaced, when the whispers in the hallway seemed to stab through her heart. But now, she had a new sense of strength, one that was rooted in the people who cared about her. Emily's words were the spark, but Mia's invitation had been the fire that began to burn away the darkness. Lily began speaking up more, telling her parents about what had been happening at school. Her mum and dad were devastated by the extent of the bullying, but they were determined to make things right. They worked with the school, the teachers, and even the other students to create a safer environment. Slowly, the atmosphere at Oakwood Middle began to shift. Other students who had been quietly witnessing the bullying started speaking out. Lily wasn't the only one who had been suffering in silence. As months passed, Lily became a voice for those who felt invisible, for those who were too afraid to speak up. She joined the school's anti-bullying initiative and started volunteering to mentor younger students. Her experiences had given her a unique perspective, and she realized that by sharing her story, she could help others find the strength to stand up for themselves. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. In the end, Lily's journey wasn't a simple tale of overcoming the odds. It was about finding strength in the unlikeliest places, about realizing that even in her darkest hours, there was always someone out there who cared, someone who would reach out. She had made it through the worst of it, not because she was alone, but because she had discovered that she wasn't.